on a, it had a, it had an arc, and we were worried about the burnout, when you know the party was over, and that they would run out of steam. And so we started to build relationships with the school boards, different school boards in the country, starting about 13 years ago, and it started right here in Toronto. And maybe a couple of my colleagues from the boards are here, and it was interesting because I was in a conversation recently with Richard Christie, and I'm not sure if Richard's here or not, but when he and I started that relationship, and a whole series of work happened and continues to happen. The most remarkable thing about those relationships is all of them has continued, and there's 13 of them now across the country, and growing. And so what's interesting to me about that is that when he sat down and we were talking in a public meeting, he said that you've changed the culture of this institution, and there's now a different vision, and there's a lot of details under that, because it's not just about a vision. It's about executing on a whole variety of levels, from procurement and all these boring details that seem, like boring details, but they're critical in kind of creating an institutional infrastructure that sets a much higher platform for grassroots change to happen on. And so that's one example. And I wonder, because I think I think part of this resurgence is about, we want to reinvest in our public space and perhaps in our public institutions as well, if I may. And I wonder if there's something to share from your experiences, both of you, on this front.
First, it's always difficult to answer a question about, well, show me the 3 best things that are happening out there, because there's so much happening out there. And I would suggest that if you want to feel hopeful, go to the Children and Nature Network website, which is childrenandnature.org. And that's the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child. It is trying to, it's the one place in the world you can go and get the abstracts for most of the research on this. It's terribly inadequate compared to what has to be created, but it's pretty good. And you will find all kinds of great examples there of good things that are happening all over the world. In terms of the school board thing, that's interesting, because one of the things we created, I would realize that teachers were coming up to me after my sermonettes and saying, I'm getting my kids outdoors, my students, and I've been doing that for 20 years, and I'm not going to stop. I don't care what the administration says or the superintendent says, I'm still going to do it. My brother is one of those types of teachers. And I noticed 2 characteristics about them. They were often not the environmental ed teacher. They were surprisingly often the English teacher who insisted to get the kids out to write poetry under the trees, or the art teacher, do art, or the biology teacher actually thought the kids ought to get wet and muddy to learn about biology at the creek at the end of the school ground. The other characteristic was they all felt alone. They thought that because there were maybe one other teacher in their school who was doing the same thing and insisting on it. And I thought, what if they didn't feel alone? What use the internet so they connect with each other, and now they're connecting all over the world, from all over the world, these natural teachers. But I gave a speech at the Columbia University, this is a couple of years ago, and a woman drove 11 hours to hear me speak, which I'll tell you, that stunned me. But she sent me a critical email when she got home. I never met her. She said, look, Mr. Louvre, I love your grassroots approach. You're right. Natural teachers got to be contagious, great enthusiasm among teachers. It's subversive. Don't wait for the school board. But you cannot ignore the school board. You cannot ignore the administrators or the principals. You need a natural principals network. You need a natural school board network. So I may tend sometimes by default to overemphasize the grassroots, the bottom up. I tend to go there because like many of you, I'm so discouraged by what the top down is doing these days. But your example is a great example of going to the superintendents, of going to the people who can actually change policy. it has to be both ways, I think.
Well, I'll provide a similar response. But what I liked about your example was it wasn't about an action. And I think we do actions a lot. We can plan an event or plan a conference, or you can have a specific action. But the action has to be part of a larger trajectory that's about shifting the culture if it's going to result in a sustained kind of change. And I think that's part of what I kept hearing in your answers to the question is, well, we need to shift our culture. And shifting culture is really difficult, and it takes a really long time. But you asked for an example, and I often say the same thing. It's hard to use an example because when you use an example, people often find all the reasons why it is not comparable in any way to your circumstance. But with that risk in mind, I'll give an example. And it's an example of a place that has done a significant job of shifting the culture of the city. And that city is Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon is fascinating because 40 years ago, there was going to be a highway built along the waterfront. And the community banded together, not unlike we did around the Spadina Expressway. And a protest group emerged, and the community was very fractured. There were big fights. This wasn't, oh, those Portlanders that are all so green, they just get it. That didn't exist 40 years ago. There was a big fight about the vision of the city and the identity of the city, and that fight was embodied in that fight over the expressway. And it went right to the Supreme Court, where monies were then reallocated from the highway to going into bike infrastructure. And at that time, there was a new vision created for the city 40 years ago. And that vision was generated through a broad-based community process that was based on building consensus. And we do this now more today, but 40 years ago, it was a pretty radical thing to do. And it was very grassroots, and there was a tremendous amount of ownership. And what happened was subsequent political administrations that came in didn't challenge the premise of that vision of the city because of the process that was used to generate that vision. And I did some work in Portland years ago, and I remember walking into a pub and someone said to me, the politics here are incredibly boring. They're boring because there's so much consensus in the city. Wouldn't that be nice? Very, very boring politics because that vision is so widely embraced. And now Portland, for example, is way beyond bike lanes, although they're still doing that, and way beyond mixed-use walkable communities, although they're still doing an amazing job of that in the Pearl District, for example. And they're now looking at how they can take this very unique knowledge that they have in green industries and use it as the basis for their economy, and how they can export on a global scale this green knowledge that they've generated by having a very clear vision and attracting people who fit with that vision into the community and sustaining that vision over a whole series of political administrations. And what's so powerful about Portland, not that it's a land use planning example for Toronto, because it's not. And in fact, Portland came to Toronto 30 years ago to copy our transit planning. And in fact, I'm not kidding, when I was there about 4 years ago, the administration said to me, we've tried to do what you did in Toronto by integrating all these different modalities, and I was getting our city thrown back at us as a best practice, and it was quite astounding, actually. But what's interesting about that is that at that time created a very strong vision. They went out and looked around the world to find examples of who was doing it best, integrated best practices into the vision of the city, built a culture and an understanding around those best practices. So it wasn't top down at all. It was about building a tremendous amount of ownership and then continually building up and refining those ideas around that vision. And Portland the planning department has this wonderful, wonderful little brochure. It's a little flip-up brochure, and it says, we planned our city, and you flip it up and it says, and it worked. And I love it because Portland had the same plan for 40 years. They had the same plan, they didn't refine it, they had a plan and they implemented it. And it's a really, really bold example of being able to create consensus. And I believe you cannot do that unless people understand the planning processes, they understand the challenges and the constraints that a city faces. And I think in the city of Toronto, one of our challenges has been we went through amalgamation, but we never went through a process of creating that shared understanding of what we wanted to be when we grow up. And that's why we're still sort of in this limbo. We're still sort of fighting about what we're going to be when we grow up, because we haven't yet built that broad consensus about our future. And it's critical that we do that.
All right. Yeah, yeah, just, you want,
Have you guys heard this book?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to point towards one thing, that we as a culture, we're not connecting to things. And I like pointing this plant here, that this plant has the ability to communicate with human beings. And this is what this book entirely does. Now what we need is revolution in consciousness, in the way that we see the world. And from that place, that's where the change comes. And when you live in that kind of connection, this is what Zen masters, I did the monastery for 5 years so that I could get out of my head. And then I could actually feel the whole universe around me and actually communicate on a much deeper level. And then you won't have these boundaries that separate us. That like, you know, that like I'm wearing the jacket, whatever. I look at all this. I do landscape construction, so I mean that's it.
all right, thank you. I wanted to take, I know there's people that have been waiting for a couple questions. Let's take a couple questions and then we'll aim to wrap. Right here and then at the back.
This is a question really for Richard, I think. So I'm a researcher and a scientist in my history, because I then really believe in getting kids outside to educate them. Now I work for Outward Bound as a teacher, and I think one of the things you were talking about was connecting teachers who already get their kids outside and connecting them together. And I think the challenge that I see is actually getting feedback from children and from children's parents on the benefits of getting kids into nature, so that we can, I mean, it's okay preaching to the converted, but to really expand this to the general, like everybody in the school board, for example, to see the evidence that this that the benefits of getting kids into nature are, and what the questions are that you see we should be asking of students, for example, when they come from a trip or from being outside. What questions do you think and feedback we should get from students and from parents?
You know, this is such an under-researched arena. I think it's almost an academic scandal that only in the last 15 years or so has it been taken seriously, the impact of the natural world on child development and human development. I did a list of all the research questions I'd like to see asked, and it was 8 pages single-spaced. And I put it away because it was too discreet. I think that one of our ambitions is, with the Children Nature Network, is to create a database and resource center that is really large, so that people could come to it and not reinvent the wheel. They could download not only a lot of abstracts about the research, but they could download summaries of that research. We have a few, but we need many more that they could take to their school board and see this, you know, see, this is the science. And they've been very careful not to overstate science. We have some of that, we don't have enough. So that's one of our ambitions, is to make that easier for people to make the argument.
I wonder if we can I know there's a couple people waiting, and I'd like if we can flow through. Let's try and keep moving.
Just quickly for Richard, it's too late is such a dramatic statement. And since your presentation, I've been thinking why that doesn't apply to where I live. And the conclusion I've reached is that people are more engaged, active advocates of the kinds of things that are being discussed this evening. I wonder if you have a comment on that. And a quick question for Jennifer. I've been coming back to Toronto for the last half century, once or twice a year. So I see the changes here. I grew up here. So I see the changes here in a very dramatic manner. And in the last couple of days, I've just come back. I took a trip down Rouge Valley, and something really frightening is happening there. The bridges are being increased in size, and the roads are being paved. And I can't imagine how this is going to be any kind of a national park with an increase in traffic. So the question to you is, how would you suggest that we decrease the traffic or divert traffic around that park? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think the concern that you've raised is a very legitimate one. The planning around that is unfortunately before my time. It's been done over the course of the past 5 years as it's been transferred to the federal government, who is now responsible for that park. But I think overall in the city, we have an incredible challenge because our infrastructure is primarily built around driving. We are a driving city. We have very high transit usage, but we haven't been investing in transit over the past 30 years. So the primary way that people do get from place to place is by driving. And we will see a change in the demand for that kind of infrastructure when we change our movement systems to cycling, walking, and transit. And I think that's a critical part of becoming a sustainable city. Snowshoes. Ice skates.
Could I ask her where you said you live? On Vancouver Island. I don't know the answer to your question about Vancouver Island. You know, not everybody feels that way. Not every place feels that way. But I think that that is a dominant feeling in the country, in my country. Maybe not in this country, but I suspect it is.
Okay, just want to thank Richard and let you know I'm with a contingent from Guelph, about 60 kilometers west, and your book inspired and spawned a program there. The creator is with us tonight, and it's Focus on Nature. And we developed a program, Shirley Hunt and photographer in Guelph developed a program where we go into schools and equip kids with digital cameras, and we spend the day on a photograph workshop. We take them to a park, walking distance from the school or even their schoolyard. And I'm a volunteer with the program, it's volunteer run. We do many, many schools, and there isn't a child who finishes the day who doesn't feel their self-esteem has just gone through the roof. We've seen, you know, outliers in the class become just charged by taking pictures of dandelions and trees. So it was your book that inspired the program, and it's just a wonderful thing that you've done, and we've embraced it. We'd love to share it with communities across Canada, and it's got lots of potential. It's a grassroots program, but we have wonderful buy-in. One of our boards of education wants to see every grade 5 class in the school board take it. So thank you. It's been a great initiative on your behalf.
Thank you.
Hi, Richard. I've shared with you that I am a huge fan of your work, have been for many years, and I am part of a network or web of really amazing families and people and organizations in Toronto that do have a vision and live it and are letting our kids run free and get muddy and get wet and climb trees and doing all the things that we really want to do for our children. One of the things that I'm really stuck on right now is it's actually illegal to climb trees in Toronto. It's actually not. It's true. And a police officer told me that I had to put shoes on my child in a public space, like in the ravine. And in the face of some of these moments where we're trying to live out this vision and really connect our kids to nature and connect ourselves to nature, it's almost like we're some kind of like we're doing something illegal or bad, or and you know we run up against, a lot of us have run up against this tension with the city about and police officers about running free in our parks and doing the things that we do. And so I guess what I'm sharing is that it's not as easy as it sounds, because it takes a lot of courage to actually face that. I was petrified when that police officer, 3 bikes on or police officers on bikes stopped me and told my little 4-year-old to put shoes on. And you know, in the moment that I'm standing there, all I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, they could call CAS on me, which is our child services agency, or whatever, however it works. Hopefully I'll never know that. But there's this there's a very valid fear, I guess, and a lot of us are doing it anyways, which is great. But it's there's a lot of people working against it, and I guess so when we're hearing about how Toronto has all these wonderful uses for, or wonderful, is very supportive of people coming and using the public spaces with their children to connect with nature, I've had a lot of moments where that's actually not true. And I guess it's a little upsetting.
Yeah. Anyone want to comment?
Well, I guess I'll say, first of all, I don't actually think I'm not sure if you thought I said that, but I didn't. I think it's something that we actually struggle with as a city.
Okay.
In fact, I had the very funny experience yesterday of being at a baseball diamond with my son and a bunch of neighborhood kids playing baseball, and I looked up and there was actually a sign, a City of Toronto sign that said, "No ball playing without permit."
Yeah.
Like on my holiday Monday, I'm going to run down to City Hall and get a permit so we can throw the ball around in the park. So I think there are some old, antiquated rules and structures in this city. I think this city has been over-regulated. There isn't a day of the week where there isn't a hockey game happening on my street outside of my house with my son playing, and that's illegal too. We've never had a police officer stop us, but that's pretty much going on every single night of the week in my neighborhood. So I think we do have some antiquated rules and antiquated ways of thinking about children in the city, and I think that's part of the challenge we need to overcome. That's part of what we need to fix.
Great.
One of the
Thank
things
you.
I'd like to see is an international conference on children, nature, and the law, because so many of these regulations are well-meaning, but they actually make it very difficult. And when I say that, I don't mean only city law or government law, I mean private government law too. The community associations that run so many of the planned communities, and in the US at least, almost all new developments in the last 40 years are ruled by community associations, CC&Rs. You look at those rules, just try to put up a basketball hoop in some of these communities, let alone let the kids build a treehouse or a fort. It's not good. One woman in La Jolla told me that her community association had outlawed chalk drawing on the sidewalk, which leads to cocaine abuse. I made that last part up.
It's an easy joke here.
Yeah.
The cheap one, yeah.
Thank
By
you.
the way, I just figured out my next book is going to be called The Secret Life of Raccoons.
All right. Well, I think I know, can we have a closing comment or a closing question, and if it could be brief?
Okay, yes. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Richard, for your dedication and passion in the work that you do. I just wanted to speak to some comments earlier when you were speaking of the lack of diversity, ethnic diversity in the movement. And being a woman of color, a woman of First Nations, African, and Irish descent, and living in the city of Toronto, which is the most multicultural city. But yet I look around, and I mean no disrespect in the words that I say, but I look around and I see that it's a predominantly white audience and a white panel. And I wonder where the representation is of our community here in Toronto. How do we reach out to these communities? I've heard you mention, and I want a clarification, when you mention immigrants, are you speaking of newly immigrants? Because pretty much everyone's an immigrant unless you're First Nations, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm a person who does not see color. I grew up in a multicultural home, but I know my brothers and my sisters in different communities definitely feel that they're not being represented. And so I'm wondering if there's any consideration or thought that goes into these sort of events to ensure that people that are on the panel or that are in the spotlight are representing the communities that are here in our city. So that's my comment.
Great comment. Great comment. I know, I can tell you, I mean, my own response to that is that, you know, as an organization, it's something we take, Evergreen takes very seriously. You know, everything from internal committees and hiring to how we run our events. It doesn't show up in every event, that's for sure, and the point is well taken for tonight. But I think that it's something that I know not only from within our own organization, but in the community, I think it's a very active discussion. So, you know, maybe it feels like cold comfort for tonight, but I think that it's a very active conversation. I don't know if there's other comment that you want to add?
One of the things that Children Nature Network, and I agree, I mean, it's true, it's absolutely true. Usually in these groups, there's more diversity than in a typical conservation group get together, but only slightly. You're right, and that's why I think that part of the problem, part of the solution is to think in terms of capacity. You know, what do different cultures bring to this issue? How do we connect to nature in different ways? And you're right, we have to be more assertive about that. And we've created something called the Natural Leaders Network. These are young people that we hope are the real leaders of the Children in Nature, the New Nature movement. And the leader of that is a guy named Juan Martinez from South Central LA. And for whatever reason, maybe it's his charisma, I don't know, but most of the young people who have signed up for this Natural Leaders Network are young people of color, often from inner cities, and they are incredibly effective. I mean, Juan Martinez was headed for gangs, he tells this story, and now he's spoken at the White House twice. I don't have a great answer. I mean, we need to be a lot more assertive about that. That's all.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to close the evening, and it's really important to do some thanks. It takes many hands, as we know, to put together an event like this. And it starts with thanking all of you for being here. I mean, I'm feeling like there's kind of memories of the long winter in the room right now. All of us have got the shiver and a little bit, you know, no, good, doing okay. I know, I think there was a few that left in t-shirts earlier because you can feel the chill. But let me thank we have a little bit of an information village of a number of NGOs here. And I want to thank all of them for being here. Hopefully you got a chance to touch base. And I think Real Food has still, I'm so pleased that you, is that correct? So certainly we've got Real Food for Real Kids. Thank you for being here. The Back to Nature Network, Learning for a Sustainable Future is here. The Pine Project, Earth Day Canada are all here tonight. So thanks to them for being here. We really appreciate you being here, share your work. I want to thank the event supporters. The Pizza Libretto was out cooking in what started in the rain. Hopefully you got some of their great pizza, and that'll be here for the rest of the summer. Harmony Organic was here with serving their chocolate milk with Taste of Nature with their granola bars. Hopefully you got to try those. We want to thank Toyota and BMO, both who are our program sponsors and really help make this evening happen. We really want to thank the Toronto French School, who were partners in this event from the very beginning and created this whole opportunity for us to work together on this. Particularly, I want to thank Dr. John Godfrey, Eric Robertson, and Lisa Donahue, who all played a role in making this happen. We really appreciate all of your great work. I want to thank my own team, the children's program team here at Evergreen, and I'd single out Amal Musa, who's here, and who was our lead organizer, if you were involved in the organization of this event. Amal, are you here? Where are you? She's organizing the next step. I can see her coming from a far distance. And last, just for the thank yous, and I have one more bit, is I want to thank Jennifer. Really appreciate you being here. I know it's a long day and no dinner, and I know you do a lot of those, and we really appreciate you. You should get some food. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your experience, both personal and professional. It's really been a powerful part of the evening. And of course, Richard, we want to thank you. I think it's, all of us are gathered here probably have all read and feel a strong feeling to your book and feel like it helps us come together and have the conversation. And it's an enormous gift you've given us with your writing and your words, and we're greatly appreciative of you.
Well, I want to thank you and the organizers, and Lisa and all the organizers of this, and the great feeling that you share with me. I want to make clear that I struggled with this myself. As a parent, I struggled with it. I struggle to pull myself away from my screens, my computers, etc. I force myself to go outside. I force myself to hike. It is not easy. But I'd also like to thank the raccoons for their cameo appearance, the guest stars of the evening. Thanks.
I have a little gift for both of you, and it's heavy. Be prepared. Oh, yeah, my goodness. Thank you both. Now, yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Now, just a couple logistics that you may want to know. One, there is a book signing. Richard is going to be available for book signing, and